Welcome to another episode of Viatorian Voices, where our conversations on the way give witness to the ministry and spirituality of walking with youth and those who go underserved. In this episode, we explore the idea of commitment. Why do we decide to commit to things? Why do we hesitate to commit? Why do we fear commitment? But perhaps most importantly, what does commitment enable? What do we gain within the commitments we make? Members of the Viatorian Vocation Ministry Team, our group of professed brothers and priests who reach out to young people, accompany them in service and reflection, and facilitate vocational discernment, gathered to share their experiences of commitment, reaching back to their time before religious life to share their perspectives as single men, and then moving forward in their stories through formation and professing vows into their lives as perpetually professed Viatorians. I'm Associate Dan Masterton, and I produce this episode, the 100th episode of the Viatorian Voices podcast. After you listen, help us tell the Viatorian story by rating our podcast in your favorite app, sending this episode link to a friend, and praying for and encouraging young men considering Viatorian religious life. To begin, the men explored their perceptions of commitment from before they entered religious formation. Young men who are curious about religious life or interested in discernment are encouraged to connect with a vocation minister, like our vocation director, Brother Peter. In that accompaniment, young men receive conversational support, advice on best practices such as spiritual direction, regular acts of service, and a consistent life of prayer and journaling, and the opportunity to discover God's invitations for them, perhaps including religious life as a Viatorian brother or priest. On this question of commitment before discernment and religious life, you'll hear first from Father John Eustace, who is currently chaplain and director of campus ministry at St. Viator High School. John made his initial profession in 2005. I'll cut in now and then to introduce each panelist and orient you to the discussion. So now, here's our 100th episode. Enjoy the conversation.
So growing up in the Las Vegas area, I lived at home during college. Lived at home during high school all the way through college. One thing that I really knew that I wanted to commit my life to was to serve people. I knew I wanted to be of service to people, and I was thinking it would probably be in the educational realm of things. And so a commitment that I made was to be able to serve people in varieties of ways. One of them was through my college experience, through the Newman Center at UNLV. Every Friday morning, we would go to the Catholic Worker House at 5 o'clock in the morning, help prepare food to be given to people who were experiencing homelessness. We would serve them in this park in the outdoors. And I got to be there with other people who I witnessed committed their entire lives to serving those who were hungry. And that was the people at the Catholic Worker. But it was also my closest friends who eventually helped me to see the Viatorians as a possibility. And I don't think it would have been without feeding people who were hungry in the streets of Las Vegas. If I didn't do that, I don't think religious life would have been a possibility for me. So that was one of the commitments that I made, was let me on a weekly basis make sure I'm serving people. And then that moved also into listening to invitations from others. One of my best friends, Pauline, was the youth minister at my home parish, and she was in need of volunteers, and she asked us, hey, can you commit to helping us out? My friend Ryan and I are like, well, we don't know. And then eventually she kind of tricked us into helping out. But it was okay because she saw something in us that we didn't necessarily see in ourselves, but we were helping out as volunteer youth ministers for the Life Teen program. And that was just such a deep experience. And then somewhere along the line, I ran into the Viatorians because my friend Ryan was kind of thinking about maybe becoming a brother or priest. It had something in me say, wow, that's interesting. Why would somebody want to do that? And through him, I was able to meet people like Brother Corey Brost and Brother Rob Robertson and Brother Michael Gosh, and witness how these guys did care about people who were homeless, did care about people who were hungry, and also cared about raising up young people to be leaders in the church. And that kind of sparked something in me, like, wow, what if I could do full time what I'm spending all of my time, free time volunteering doing? And so that was like the initial piece of looking at a commitment. And certainly I had my family who were always committed to serving people. Both my parents were educators. My sister was going to college to be a pharmacist, to serve people who had medical needs. And I was just surrounded by tons of people who wanted to serve people, including my scouting experience. That was another commitment of becoming an Eagle Scout and allowing God to use me to reach out to others. So that was those were the initial pieces that I think laid the groundwork for me to be able to look at the possibility of even saying, should I consider religious life?
Next, here's Brother Rob Robertson, who is currently a counselor at St. Viator High School and made his initial profession in 1987.
Mine is much less solid than what John is talking about. For me, commitment before I knew anything about having a commitment to a religious life was things like you get up and you go to school, you get up and you go to work. I saw my parents get up and go to work. I worked all through high school. I worked through college. I went to college, but there was nothing about being committed to service. There was nothing about being committed to religious life. There was nothing about being committed to helping the poor. So this whole idea of being committed to other people or being committed to a religious life was not in my vocabulary at all. So I have no idea what John's talking about whenever I think about commitment. So if you're that person listening to this and you have no idea what John was talking about, I hear you, because that was my experience of commitment, was very, very simplified, and it was just you get up and you live your life. You get up and you do the things you're supposed to do. You go to work, you go to school, and that was my experience. It gradually grew into another understanding of commitment, which I think we'll get to as we move along through this podcast, but it was a very, very limited understanding of commitment as I was growing up. So that was my understanding of commitment before I learned about religious life.
And now here's Brother Jhobany Orduz, who is currently a transitional deacon completing studies in formation for priesthood, scheduled for early next year, 2025. Jhobany made his initial profession in 2014.
Well, I relate a little more with Rob's idea of commitment because I wish I will have the commitment of Father John in his idea before he became a religious. And I didn't go that far like Brother Rob, but I was really committed with myself. I was committed with achieving my goals and with going and pursuing the goals that I have in my life. And my goal during my time in school, in high school, was getting into the army. And that was a goal that I pursued and I wanted to, and I went to the army. And being in that process, for different reasons, I should leave the army, this is a long story, but that time in the army gave me the skills and the opportunity to pursue different type of commitments in my life, and especially the discipline to do it and to work for that perspective. And that was very helpful because after joining religious life, the same sense of discipline and encouragement to myself of achieving my goals, but not also my goals, but achieving the goals of the community and pursuing my personal needs as a religious, and following the intention of committing myself to others became more real and more tangible for me. I could touch them in a better way, because at the beginning, and that is why I relate a lot, if you in your life think that the most important part is you as a young man and achieving your goals, I related with that a lot. And I was pursuing a career, I was pursuing like having a family and having some role in society, but at the same time, the way that I took pushed me in the direction of being disciplined and using that discipline to pursue my goals. And when I joined my faith formation and my life as a child of God, all those things that I learned from before and all that discipline helped me a lot with the type of commitment that I am living now as a Viatorian. So that was very powerful in my life.
Finally, here's Brother Peter Lamech, who is currently our Director of Vocation Ministry. Peter made his initial profession in 2016.
For me, I think high school was a really formative time for me, both in terms of academically and with sports. I think in particular, like football was a really formative experience for me for what it felt like to make a commitment not only to something I was passionate about, but to also my peers who were also a part of the team. I wasn't really involved in like service or campus ministry in high school. I was going to mass on Sunday and praying kind of on my own. But football for me was really an avenue for me kind of discovering that I loved being a part of a group with kind of a common mission. Football was really demanding in terms of the time that it required, the type of commitment it required. During the season, pretty much my life was like wake up, go to school, go to practice, eat, do homework, like watch film, and go to bed. And also in the off season, you had to commit to all the off season workouts. But I even think more significantly, I had to make some life choices that were very different than my peers. I had a lot of friends that went to high school with who came from my grade school who started going to parties, and they started getting into the whole drinking scene. And football for me really was like really an easy excuse that I did not want to risk not being able to play football by being basically doing something that I shouldn't be doing, and something that if I were caught would not only affect me but it would also affect all of my teammates. And so I said no to kind of going to parties, no to alcohol, and then also like given how time consuming it was, it gave me an experience of like doing something while knowing that a lot of other people are doing other things. But I loved it. I loved the practices. I loved the workouts. I loved that feeling at the end of like a workout or end of practice of just like knowing that I had given everything I could. And while I wasn't really the best player, my peers recognized me for like kind of the effort, the dedication, and they kind of saw something that in me that I didn't even kind of see in myself. And so, football, it's interesting how God can work in our lives, that I think God can use any experience that we have and is able to bring his grace into our lives to help us grow and mature and to even recognize that we have a vocation. When I look back, while it may sound kind of strange, I really do think God was working through even like high school football to help me grow, mature, and then learned that I really love being a part of like a group, a community that has a real concerted focus. The shift for me was from sports to, okay, how do I direct my time, effort, energy to helping people? And finding people and finding a group that was really passionate about the same things that I wanted to be passionate about.
For this next bit, the men addressed their perception of commitment as they discerned religious life and began early formation. When a young man is interested in Viatorian religious life, he spends time in accompaniment with our vocation director. After some time working together, the director may recommend that the discerner apply for religious formation. After completing some medical and psychological exams, compiling some paperwork, and submitting some written components, a young man can be approved for pre-novitiate, an initial experience of religious life in living in community and engaging in Viatorian ministry, usually 1 year in length. After that, the man might discern to continue into novitiate. Now called a novice, the man is referred to by the title brother and considered a member of the Viatorian community. He undertakes an intensive, closely directed year of prayer and study geared toward the charism and history of the Viatorians and an exploration of the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience that he may ask to profess at the conclusion of novitiate. Looking back, what was this period like? Was it fearful, exciting, both? Brother Rob leads off this time.
For me, it was very exciting. I was not Catholic when I first encountered the Viatorians. I was a young man who started teaching at a Viatorian high school. I was not Catholic, and so this whole idea of being committed to a religious community was totally foreign to me. But I started working at a Viatorian Catholic high school, and I met the priests and brothers who worked there and saw something in them that was very, very attractive to me, which was very surprising to me because it was totally foreign to anything I'd ever encountered in my life before. As I got to know them more and more and spending time with them, and they started inviting me to be part of their life, and I saw the commitment they had to something that really intrigued me and really felt right to me. You know, I look back on it today, it's something that I know was a call from God. At the time, I would not have used those words, but today I know it was a call from God. And that was my first real understandings of commitment, was seeing those men that I encountered in Springfield, Illinois, a house of 13 Viatorian priests and brothers who embraced me as a young man who was searching for something to guide his life. And they invited me to be part of their life, and I took a chance that I never ever would have imagined I would have found myself taking. And that was the beginning of my formation. They invited me to move in with them as part of, at that time it was called an affiliate program. And I took a chance. I moved in with them, and that was my first real, using the word commitment. I committed myself to live a religious life as a layperson. And that was my initial formation. I learned about prayer. I learned about spirituality. I learned about living in community. And it was very, very exciting time for me. People, sometimes people say, well, look at everything you're giving up. And I will tell you that I gave up nothing. I gained so much more. And I look back on my life today, and there is so much more to my life than I ever would have had if I would not have met the Viatorians. The experiences that I've had, the life that I've led, the people I've met, because I made the initial commitment to the Viatorians. My formation has been fantastic. My initial formation of just learning, how do you live in community? How do you connect with people of all different ages and different backgrounds and different religious thoughts and ideas, and form basically a family, people you didn't choose to be your family, but who've embraced you and welcomed you and want to live life with you. And so that's kind of how my initial formation started. And, when I first started, I always knew that it was a call from, well, I didn't know at the time, but I look back now, it was a call from God, but I said yes, and I kept moving forward day by day by day, knowing that as each day unfolded, if there was a day that it didn't feel right, that it was something that I had a choice about. But I've been doing this for 40 years, and there's not one day that I've regretted. It's been a constant moving forward and joy-filled commitment and formation. So that's really the way it's been for me since the very beginning.
Before I joined the Viatorians, I was already committed with my work, but at the same time with the ministry, with two type of groups, with the people with this foundation, Fundación Eudes, that work with people with HIV positive, and also with people in the modern slavery of prostitution. And I committed myself after my long week of teaching in college and working in civil engineering school. I used to go there every weekend to help, and I was really committed with that ministry. However, the culture where I belong to when I professed my first vows, they were not just commitments, but they were sacred commitments. And that was a different commitment that pushed me in a different direction, because my perspective of commitment with religious life was not only a commitment with a social organization, it was a special commitment between me and God through my community. And it was something sacred that, of course, you have fears, because I grew up in an environment of different perspectives and a very, if I can say, worldly type of life. But at the same time, pursuing this type of commitment, consecrating my life to God in my religious community, puts me in a different perspective. So I just started to learn how to commit myself for other people in the name of Jesus Christ, in the name of my community, and in the name of the religion that I profess. So that was a significant change that created some fears, because I didn't know if it would work out. That's different when you commit yourself to a work in a social organization that help people in prostitution, that you can quit in whatever time you want because you are not forced to be there, rather than when you put yourself committing your life in something that in my personal perspective was so sacred. So I was with the fear that what happened if it doesn't work out for me. So all those if were like the fear that I have to step back, to step forward, but at the same time, it was living one day at a time. It was only moving in the direction that I wanted to, because I really wanted to commit myself deeper and deeper in my community. And similarly, as Brother Rob was talking about, the gains that I had after that have been so significant in my life, because I gained the opportunity to work with other people, the opportunity to get to know more religious and more new ministries, and the opportunity to keep teaching in the college that I was teaching. But people were amazed of how can you do this kind of thing and being so normal, but at the same time living in what so many people call not really normal life, that is being a religious and being consecrated. So I was a civil engineering professor, but at the same time being a religious, and having with them these wonderful conversations of explanation. I am Jhobany, and that doesn't change that I live in community, because I have a wonderful community and I live with them and I enjoy my life as a consecrated man, but at the same time I can enjoy my life with my work and with people that I work with and with the students that I teach to. So those kind of things were the new transformation of the commitment. And I personally believe that is the grace of God supporting me in each step, because I had so many fears, especially at the beginning, but God was supporting me and giving me the strength to move step by step in each one of the stages in my religious life.
After the novitiate, when I professed my temporary vows and began studying to be a teacher, I felt this kind of almost kind of a combination of being anxious, but also like this almost impatience of wanting to, like, I want to get going, I want to get started, and I want it all to happen like tomorrow. And I remember sitting down with one of our brothers, Father Corey Brost, and he told me something simple that just gave me an incredible amount of peace. He said, you wake up every day and you just ask God, oh God, how can I serve you today? Focus on the day, and even one aspect of the day at a time. And it was a really graceful conversation, because, I stepped back and I said, you know what? Yeah, this is just an invitation to engage and participate every day in community life. So continuing to share my life with my brothers. Yeah, I'd been in the community for a couple of years, but continue to make that ongoing commitment to getting to know them, letting them to get to know me. And then in terms of ministry, I'll tell you that while I felt called to be a teacher, learning how to be a teacher was not easy. It was not easy. And I remember like thinking to myself, like, wait a second, God, like you want me to be a teacher, but shouldn't this be easier? And so there's just like a lot to learn. And certainly within the challenges of learning how to be like a competent teacher in the classroom, I had moments of doubt, moments of feeling like an imposter. And this is where the prayer was really important, and making that daily commitment to prayer that, every time I would step into the chapel and take some time before the Blessed Sacrament or go to Mass or take some time to really just sit and reflect, I always felt this kind of peace, consolation that I was doing exactly what God wanted me to do. But, I had to overcome some challenges, and it wasn't going to be, easy. When I think about commitment during religious formation and temporary vows, for me it was all about just focus on the day, and the day in terms of my community life and my staying engaged and in relationship with my brothers. And am I putting my best foot forward in really trying to learn and to grow in being a professional minister, and not letting personal prayer fall to the wayside? That despite kind of a lot of energy going into ministry and community life, of still being intentional about taking time every day to just take notice of God's presence and to reflect and to really identify the grace of God that day.
I remember in the middle of the college age for myself asking the question, okay, you're Catholic, but what does that really mean for you, John? And asking that question opened me up to beginning to pray for the first time as an adult, to take on prayer, to graduate from my junior high self when I was finally about 20 years old and go, wait a minute, what does it mean to pray? So investigating all of that. And I would have to say that when you pray, watch out. God wants to mess with your life in a good way, in a very good way. So as I'm reflecting back, as I'm listening to my brothers here talking about their path and everything, it really was the decision to step forward into being a Catholic male and to open up the prayer process. And doing that opened me up to really listening to where God was and where the invitations were. And then the whole Viatorian thing happened by accident, or it would seem it was by accident. My buddy Ryan, who was thinking about becoming a Viatorian brother or priest, was helping out in a summer program and said, hey, John, would you fly to Chicago from Vegas? And then when I'm done with this program, and then we could drive back to Vegas together, because he had driven here. Sure. And then the car breaks down, and I meet Brother Rob and Father Corey and Brother Michael. But it wasn't so much that, but there was something that was happening there. The question to God was, all right, what are you trying to teach us, God? And then later on, the question from Corey, who was vocation director, called me on the phone and asked me, hey, your friends were saying you might be interested in being a brother or priest. What do you think about that? And my initial response was my stomach got tied in a knot. I could barely breathe, and that was foreign to me. But I knew that there was something there, something that I've never experienced before, that said, basically, you got to check this out. And I was terrified. I was terrified because I already had my plans made. I was going to graduate college, get married, have a family, have a house and a dog and all of that stuff. But this terrified me because that plan might not be there. So the first step was going to the vocation retreat 6 months later after being stranded with the Viatorians, traveling from Vegas back to Chicago in January. Who does that? And I'll have to say that coming there and meeting these brothers again, specifically Rob saying, hey, how's your sister doing? And remembering all what I had shared with him 6 months before opened up something in me saying, these guys care about me. These guys listen. and they care about the young people they work with. Wow, this is something I need to pay attention to. So over the next year and a half, 2 years of college, that really became like something comfortable. And through my spirituality, through my prayer, I was able to finally say, okay, I'm going to try this out. But I was still terrified. I said, I'm only trying this out for a year and no longer. I joined with 2 other guys in the pre-novitiate, and they were ready to go on to novitiate. And I was like, no way. No way. No, let me just be here this year. And then at the end of that year, the 2 other guys, Father Jason being one of them, moved on and became a novice. And I wanted nothing to do with that because it was going too fast for me. But another opportunity came up where I could go to Belize and continue my pre-novitiate. So I did, and I thought that was a really good experience. Got to know more of the men in the community. But still, something was tugging at me to say, I need to live a little bit more life on my own. And part of that was seeing the world a bit. I went to Europe with my best friend, but it was in the middle of that I discovered that I really missed living in community, praying in community, and working in community. And so then the decision was very easy at that point to say, yeah, I'd like to be a novice. And so I became a novice. Each step of the way, the decision got easier and easier. And by the end of my novitiate, when it came time for asking to profess the 3 vows, poverty, chastity, and obedience, that was a no-brainer because I had spent almost 4 years living this life and being supported and experiencing the love of my confreres, my brothers in community. So yeah, at that point, the fear left, and then I was able to actually live out the life in temporary vows and try it on for size, and then new worlds just opened up for me, and how to be a youth minister, and how to walk with people, and how to be a brother in community.
In this next part of the discussion, the men address discerning the request to profess perpetual vows. Viatorian brothers begin religious life by professing temporary vows, or first vows, for a period of 3 years. All Viatorians begin their religious life as brothers. At the end of each temporary vows period, they can again profess temporary vows for another short term. At some point, our brothers may discern that they'd like to continue in vowed living for the rest of their lives, and so they can request to profess perpetual vows. They profess these same vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, but this time for the rest of their lives. Perpetually professed brothers can then serve in formal leadership positions, including on the councils and chapters and as formation directors. Additionally, brothers who discern God's invitation to priesthood can further their formation with a view to ordination, which may only follow perpetual profession. So, how do our men reflect back on this evolution into perpetually professed religious life? Brother Jhobany responds first.
When I was in my temporary vows, I was living in community, but most of the time I wasn't working with the community. I was working as a college professor. For the community, I was working in one university that was called Uniminuto, and then I moved to Universidad Católica de Colombia, that is pretty much the Catholic university from Colombia, and I was working there, and I was living a very interesting life because it was having this contrast between living in community but working with a completely different group of people. And this is these 2 commitments, one with my work and one with my community for my life, and of course with ministry on the weekends with church. But in my 4th year, I was invited to come to the United States to take English classes. So I came here. That is by the time that I get to know Peter and other guys in the high school. I went to my classes, learning English, like moving from, by the time that I was invited to come here, I was the director of civil engineering school in Catholic University. So I moved from being the boss of everybody in the school to become an elementary school student, because I was learning how to speak, how to say a word, how to write down things. So it was a kind of very interesting contrast, and I think that one of my biggest supports in that process was Father Dan Hall. He was one of the ones who can speak the Spanish very well, but at the same time he was in the Navy as well, and very disciplined man, so he never talked to me in Spanish, more than trying to explain to me some things, but he encouraged me a lot of what was the meaning of my commitment as a Viatorian. And when he was provincial, I request my final vows, and I was approved. And giving that step was meaningful for my religious life, but at the same time, that moved me from being a student to work in Colombia with some other type of ministry with the community. And that gave to me a different sense of commitment, because it's not only living with the guys in my community and working away, but was living and working all together. And that creates, of course, fears and challenges, and I was totally out of my comfort zone because I used to teach in college, and in college things were differently, especially in teaching, and I went to teach math and physics in the high school. In college, I remember it was so simple because I didn't have to control discipline of the students. So if they were using their cell phones, I just stopped my class and I asked them, if you don't want to be here, the door is open, you are an adult, you can leave the classroom and we can see each other the day of your final exam. That's fine, I don't have any problem. When I went to teach in the high school, I realized I cannot do that. Because if I say something like that, all the class is gonna just run away. And what is gonna happen? I cannot do such a thing with the high school students. So it was a different learning, it was a different process, and it was completely different type of commitment. And I relate with what Peter was talking about. So it was, what is the training for being a teacher? In my case, when you do something for so long, you get used to. and for me, learning teaching high school was a completely different stuff, and that was, again, the same discipline that I learned in the army, and the same sense of commitment that I can be successful with this and I can make it work, and I did. And it was a process of learning with my community, and that happened during the pandemic time as well. So I, at some point, I say I was the most blessed teacher in the high school when the pandemic hit, because I could gain the discipline of getting all the students quiet with one click. I know that this is not fair with the students, but I was like, oh, that's awesome, because I have the time to teach my whole class, and I don't have to, deal with the discipline and all those kind of things that you live in the classroom. And it was a new learning, it was a new sense of commitment, but at the same time, it was a different invitation as well. I remember one of the conversations with Father Jason Nesbitt invited me, why don't you consider priesthood? We need the process of priesthood in our community, or we need people willing to do so, because there is a lot of need in the church. And that question just kept moving and understanding, because by the time that I came here, I was pretty much clear that I wanted to be a Viatorian. That was my clarity, and I was fine with my life as a brother. I was enjoying my life as a brother, and I never pursued the ministry in priesthood by the time. But professing my final vows gave me the sense of, I am committed for the rest of my life with this community, and I want to do so, and I want to live it with the sacredness that is integrated in my process of committing my life to something special and to something different that was my religious life. So that's basically the step that I gave between my temporary vows to the final vows, and now the process that I am living in my final steps of formation for the priesthood.
I guess for me, when I was taking time to really pray and reflect on my retreat and preparation for perpetual vows, I really looked at, what did my life look like before I joined the Viatorians in 2014, and then what did my life look like 5 years later? And the Viatorians had totally like expanded my world. The people I was able to encounter from all over the world, people who were asylum seekers and refugees from almost every continent, in learning how to be a teacher and a coach and finding a passion to be an educator when I really didn't even know really exactly what I wanted to do. To be surrounded by people who were so mission driven and like woke up every day and wanted to help people. In a word, I was more joyful, and in my early 20s, and kind of doing the typical thing of going into the city, going to the bars, and trying to find girlfriend, I was like pretty miserable. And I definitely had some moments in prayer and in church that kind of prompted me to really take a look at what I wanted to do with my life. And I definitely felt God's invitation to really, dedicate my life to helping people. But 5 years down the road in living my life as a Viatorian, I was happier. I was more put together. I was a better person. I was more compassionate, more kind. And I think I felt a growing sense of wanting to grow spiritually, professionally, and to continue to be a part of a group that was really making a difference in people's lives. The Viatorians might be a smaller congregation, but we have an impact on people's lives every single day. And I hear it. I hear things very frequently like young people saying my life is different because I got to know the Viatorians, because they walked with me and helped me. So yeah, it was really just kind of taking an inventory of all the experiences that I'd had and really taking kind of a look at myself at the end of 5 years and saying, do I like the person I've become? And I did. And I continue to like the person I've become. And while it's, I'm still a work in progress, I really like the orientation of where my life is directed.
I'm thinking of at the vows ceremony, when I professed my first vows, there's a tradition that we have as Viatorians. When the one who professes their vows, they are at the front of the chapel, and the other Viatorians who are professed come up and embrace you. And I can remember the youngest Viatorian in vows coming up all the way through Father Tremonti, who was 92 at the time, embracing me. I didn't even think he was capable of giving a hug, but he did. And that's forever burned in my heart. And then as I would live out the vows, the first year I was a student at Loyola University, but then eventually I got hired on at St. Viator High School in 2007, where Peter Lamech was a senior and Dan Masterton was a senior that year. And really got to be able to put my education into practice as being a campus minister and walking with young people side by side with my fellow Viatorians. And there were several of us who worked at the school at that time. Rob, I think there were probably about 10 of us there. An amazing experience that we were doing this ministry together. But I remember one specific prayer service, and it wasn't so much like the ministry that I was able to do, although at that time I thought, wow, I got ministry to give and I'm going to give it. There was a prayer service for a young man who was dealing with cancer, and I was the only one available to help with the prayer service. And we were in the chapel, and there was a young man named Dan Masterton who was there saying, I'm here to help you, and there were a couple other students too. And I was very nervous. How do we make sure that this is a good experience for the kids? And Dan was following me, and I was kind of pacing back and forth, and he literally said, stop, I can't follow you. And that was a wake-up call for me as a Viatorian. I remember bringing it to spiritual direction too. It's like, okay, wait a minute. Here's a young person that I'm supposed to be ministering to, yet he was the voice of God for me to say, slow down, and had something to teach me as well. And so throughout my growth in the first 3 years as a Viatorian brother, I had multiple experiences, multiple times of being able to go to retreat and reflect on who God was calling me to be, and to question, is this the right life for me? And never did I think, no, this is not the right life for me. So when it came time for the provincial, he was asking me probably about 6 months before I was eligible for perpetual vows. He says, what are you thinking with perpetual vows, for the rest of your life? If he had asked me that question earlier, I would have said, no, leave me alone. But I came to the point where I said, you know what? Yeah, I think this is where God's inviting me. If professing vows for the rest of my life means discerning, means asking God, where do you need me to be? And asking the community, how can you assist me and how can I assist the community? If it's continually that and asking about growth, if that's what this life is about, that there's continual growth, then yes, I want to be a part of it. And that's what I wrote in my letter. And I was accepted to profess perpetual vows, and I wasn't even thinking of priesthood. I wasn't even remotely thinking of priesthood at that time. It was like, this is the group of people I want to be a part of because I live with them and we minister together, we pray together, we support one another, and we're able to be ministered to and we're able to minister with young people. So I wouldn't say it was an easy decision, but it was a natural decision. And it was a decision made in that present moment, looking back on everything that had come before.
For me, taking perpetual vows was probably the easiest decision I've ever made. There was no question at all that I would take perpetual vows. After living my temporary vows for 3 years, kind of like what Peter was saying, I realized that my life was so much more fulfilled than I ever could have imagined. I think about the 5 years that I taught as a lay teacher. I was a lay teacher, that's what my profession was, and it was fine, but it was just fine. I got up, I went to work, did my thing, but when I joined the Viatorians and lived with the Viatorians, my 3 years of temporary vows, my life, kind of like the Wizard of Oz, it became in color. It was completely changed my life and the way I saw the world. The experiences that I had are things I never ever thought I would have. Every house I've ever lived in with the Viatorians has been a large house, which has been a blessing. Lived with all kinds of different people. Experiences I've had sleeping in homeless shelters with homeless people, working in soup kitchens, working in a hospital with crack-addicted babies. These are things I never, ever would have imagined myself doing. And I can't even imagine still in 40 years sitting in a classroom just being a teacher for 40 years. I probably would be bored out of my mind. Probably ready to retire with a nice pension, but bored out of my mind. But 3 years of temporary vows, realizing there's nothing else I want to do but be part of this community and continue to have these beautiful, colorful, vivid experiences that I've had for my entire life. So that's the way it's been since I took perpetual vows. That's the way it's been for the 40 years that I've been in vows. And every day I wake up joyful and happy and blessed in the community that I'm a part of and the world that I see in bright, vivid colors.
Finally, our panel discusses living their religious lives within perpetual profession. Father John and Brother Peter have served as vocation directors. Father John and Brother Rob have served stints as provincial counselors. All these men have served on our provincial chapter, on the Viatorian Community Council, and all 4 of them were part of this past summer's general chapter of Viatorians from all around the world. Additionally, they continue to serve in myriad ways in organizations we own, sponsor, or administer, and give witness to the Viatorian charism in increasingly diverse ways. Our Constitution discusses the apostolic creativity that vows can help enable. So, what have these men noticed since they professed their perpetual vows? For this last bit, Brother Peter shares first.
Time goes when you're committed to something, your understanding and experience of the commitment continues to grow and mature and develop. And one of the kind of the greatest blessings for me is understanding my responsibility to be there for my brothers. And as probably kind of as I've kind of grown and matured over the last 10 years, just as a person, through living in community and being in ministry and trying to help people, I think I'm much more intentional about trying to maintain and grow my relationship with my brothers who've made the same life commitment as me. And it's really life-giving for me to come home at the end of the day and to share what's going on. And I look forward to listening to what's going on in the lives and ministry of my brothers. Being in ministry presents kind of challenges all the time of how to best help people and how to best run an institution so that it can flourish, so the people and the mission can flourish. And having that dialogue with one another, it's just so life-giving for me. So it's been, I guess, one of those kind of surprises to me as far as what does it mean to really live in community? What does it mean to really experience being a part of like a brotherhood? And in a way, the kind of the nature of the demands, the nature of the responsibility put on me, and then also my brothers to be there, for me as well. So I guess my experience of commitment has been one of kind of a growing understanding of what it means to really be a religious brother for, the guys who make the same commitment as me.
I totally agree with everything Peter said. I mean, this is the best fraternity in the world, and that's all I'm going to say.
I had the experience last month of just coming to a realization that I live in a life that is so free. And one might not think that the vows are freeing. In 3 days, I had some of the most amazing experiences possible. 4 days. I had gone down to Colombia to witness the ordination of Father Juan Carlos Ubaque in Tunja, and then the next day was his first Mass of Thanksgiving at his home parish in this tiny little town up in the mountains in Setaquira. And I was there with Viatorians celebrating that. I flew back. The next Tuesday, I have Mass with St. Viator High School students in the afternoon, a 30-minute Mass, and these 4 boys are there. And it's like, wow. I go from Colombia to St. Viator High School with these 4 sophomores. And then that evening, I go with Father Charlie Bolzer to St. Coletta's, where it's a service that works with adults with disabilities. We had Mass with them, and you can only imagine what comes out of their mouths at any given time. And it was just like, wow, I'm here too. And then that evening, Brother Peter and I were online with the discernment group from young men in colleges all over the country. In 4 days, this life allowed me to be able to have the freedom to be present to all of those communities with Viatorians side by side with me. This lifestyle is just completely amazing. That it's freeing. It's something that God has gifted me with, and I would agree with Rob that this is the best fraternity ever. Doesn't mean there aren't frustrations at times, but I am so glad I said one day, yeah, let me try out this step. And then the next day, let me continue that step. And then the next day. It doesn't just happen in one decision. It's several decisions together. And I don't think I'm missing out on any part of life. This is an amazing way to see the world. I wish more people, and I know more people will be able to see it if they just take the next step that they feel drawn to.
Yeah, in my case, I can join you when you mentioned that this is the best fraternity. I have lived a wonderful experience in the last part, especially after my final vows and my moving through all the process of committing my life through my job and my ministry and my desires to the new ministry that I am facing now as a transitional deacon, and being able to be where I never thought I could be, with the gift of helping communities in English-speaking context and with the Hispanic context, and helping both of those groups, and at the same time helping. Like one little example was last weekend we had this children retreat with a group that is called Camino y Esperanza, where most of the kids are children not only from Latino community but from Anglo community that are involved, and that preaching should be bilingual because it should be meaningful for the English speakers and the Spanish speakers. If it was not for this community, I will never have the possibility to do such a thing and serve people in different languages and serve the people of God through my community. So that's been a blessing, and that's a blessing that gives me at the same time the freedom that John was talking about, because I have never feel forced to do something that I don't want to do. The community always encouraged me to fulfill or to achieve the goals that I want to achieve and fulfill the ministry in the best way I can do it. And that's something that is very refreshing, because that helps me to put all my soul and myself in what I want to do for the church and for the process of being a Viatorian, but at the same time for my work in the kingdom of heaven.
Another kind of great surprise for me about something that I've kind of grown to love, and that is the intergenerational dynamic of religious life. You know, I've had the privilege to be able to live with guys in their 90s and 80s and 70s and 60s and 50s and 40s, and it really creates kind of a very unique and special dynamic where, you know, we get to hear stories about guys who lived through the Depression. We hear stories about guys who experienced the years both in Vietnam, actually, you know, the experience of fighting in Vietnam, and what was it like in Vietnam here, you know, domestically. And then in terms of living in community, besides just kind of the, you know, the sharing of stories and, you know, family histories of like, there's something to say about growing old together, about being there for our guys who are in their 80s and 90s and have become a little bit more frail and they can't do the same things, but they're just as much engaged as we are, even if they're not in full-time ministry. You know, those conversations during meals, those conversations about what's going on in the world, being able to pray together is really enriching for me. And I look at it as, you know, a privilege to be able to help a guy, you know, well, one of our guys who's in a wheelchair, or to be able to have a conversation with the oldest Viatorian living in the United States, who's 95. And there's just something neat about when there's such a gap, so to speak, in the years, that I guess there's just something special there that makes religious life really kind of life-giving and unique.
Isn't it amazing that somebody who's 95, when you're in your 30s or 40s or 60s, you can say, oh, that's my brother.
Yeah.
It's not like that's
exactly.
my grandpa, that's my uncle, that's my brother. And it's just amazing. And one thing that I also want to add to this is, I don't know about your experiences, but mine is in community life, I've never laughed harder.
Yeah, that's
Whether
true.
it's jokes that are said at the dinner table, or pranks that are pulled on people, or just the wittiness that's there, or stories, it's a joyful place to be.
Yeah, and I want to add another fun fact that we live in our home is I live with two guys who are over 80 years old, and when something technological don't work for them, so they call me and we need our millennial brother here to help us out with these kind of things, and that's the conversation that makes like this sense of community, sharing our skills and the stories of an experience of the old and the new ways that we live the world in this technological area. It's really fulfilling.
That's all for this episode of Viatorian Voices. We'd like to thank Father John, Brother Rob, Brother Jhobany, and Brother Peter for their witness. We pray for God's continued grace for them in living their vows and serving the people of God. Viatorian Voices, Conversations on the Way is a production of Viatorian Vocation Ministry. The Viatorians are professed brothers and priests, together with women and men lay associates, who proclaim Jesus Christ and his gospel and raise communities where faith is lived, deepened, and celebrated. In the footsteps of Venerable Louis Querbes and under the patronage of Saint Viator, we strive to do everything well so that through us, Jesus may be adored and loved. This includes our Vocation Ministry Team. Our director, Brother Peter, is joined by a group of vocation promoters, Father John, Brother Rob, Brother Jhobany, and Father Dan Bellinger, who serves St. Viator Catholic Community in Las Vegas as parochial vicar. Together, they do outreach to young people to give witness to Viatorian religious life and accompany young men who believe God may be inviting them to become a brother or priest. To learn more about our community, visit Viatorians.com or follow us on social media at Viatorian USA. Young adults seeking to connect with faith-filled peers can request to follow at Viatorian YA on the Way on Instagram, where our young adult community is building new pathways for walking together in faith. Those seeking support and accompaniment in exploring God's invitations for them are invited to reach out to Vocation Ministry. Send us a DM on social media or email vocations@Viatorians.com to start a conversation. Remember, you can help us tell the Viatorian story by rating our podcast in your favorite app, sending this episode link to a friend, and praying for and encouraging young men considering Viatorian religious life. On behalf of Brother Peter and the Viatorian community, in this, our 100th episode, I'm Associate Dan Masterton. Venerable Louis Querbes, inspire us. St. Viator, pray for us. Adored and loved be Jesus.